We're excited to introduce our new 3D printing method, injection continuous liquid interface production. Our approach is seeking to address 3 unmet needs in additive manufacturing currently, which can broadly be divided into processes, materials, and software considerations. Specifically, we're trying to print more quickly to allow additive manufacturing to become a competitive process with traditional methods. We're trying to print with multiple materials at once to open up new property spaces in functionally graded materials. And we're trying to print with composites that open up new material properties in filled systems. Injection continuous liquid interface production builds upon the traditional continuous liquid interface production process introduced in 2015, whereby a UV projector, as shown below, shines light of 385 nanometers typically through an optically permeable window into a vat filled with photocurable resin. This spatio-selectively solidifies an object which is attached to a build platform that is being raised. Critically, unlike in prior methods, the window is oxygen permeable, creating a thin dead zone interface between the window and the object during printing, removing the time-consuming delamination step which slowed down earlier processes. While accelerating printing orders of magnitude, the CLIP process traditionally still suffers from severe mass transport limitations associated with flow through this thin, typically tens of microns, dead zone gap. Ultimately, this causes print failures and slows down the process, which should be able to go more quickly. To alleviate such mass transport limitations, we're introducing the injection CLIP process, as shown in schematic form to the right, whereby we're taking active mass transport control of fluid flows within the dead zone by attaching our printer to an external resin source, shown in schematic form, which is fluidically connected to the build platform, and then via software engineered microfluidic conduits within the part itself is connected to the dead zone, such that for the duration of the print, material can be transported to the dead zone where it's needed. Analytically modeling this process and comparing it with the traditional CLIP process through lubrication theory suggests the improvements that such a process can bring. For the traditional process, as shown to the left, suction forces are all that's bringing resin from the periphery into the dead zone as the part is being lifted. Ultimately, this leads to a stagnation region, a low pressure region within the dead zone, which is responsible for the high forces on the part. This stagnation region in the injection process, by contrast, is replaced by a high pressure zone, fundamentally altering the fluid mechanics that are occurring in this lubrication theory thin gap. To test this method, we designed a prototype injection clip printer shown in schematic form here, with a UV engine, a window, as in the traditional process, a build platform that is allowing the part to grow. In this case, however, an external resin supply, which is fluidically connected to that build platform. We're in particular interested in the forces exerted on the part during printing, hence in the upper right corner, a load cell mounted on the build platform, measuring stresses on the object during printing. Such stresses for the traditional process are shown to the left for 3 layers, whereby every slice in the printed object, that is, every time the build platform is moved upwards, massive spikes in the so-called Stefan adhesion force result, forces which scale, as we expect, with the cross-sectional area of the part. While for lower cross-sectional areas, such forces are small. For even slightly larger parts of, for instance, 22 millimeters in diameter, such adhesion forces are massive. Every motion of the platform is accompanied by a stress relaxation. However, these massive forces slow down printing. In the injection process, as shown to the right, such forces, while they're not disappeared, are significantly less. For the same parts with the same cross-sectional area, injection reduces such suction forces by orders of magnitude. We care about such an alleviation of suction forces because it allows us to accelerate printing, as shown here. For the traditional process, we quantify the maximum speed we can raise the platform before print failure occurs, specifically due to delamination due to these suction forces. This occurs quite soon for low cross-sectional area parts and low print speeds in the traditional process. With the injection process, however, we're able to accelerate such printing roughly 8-fold for a single duct running through the part. and for cross-sectional areas that are significantly higher than in the traditional process. Specifically, we consider two primitive geometries, a cylinder with a constant cross-sectional area. However, in this case, we can accelerate the rate at which we're printing this object. For the traditional process, the cross-sectional area of the cylinder at which failure occurs is very low, below 100 millimeters squared. With injection, however, we're able to push this maximum cross-sectional area significantly higher for a given print speed. Correspondingly, we can test a cone geometry, whereas in this case, we keep the velocity at which we're pulling the platform the same. However, the cross-sectional area of the part is growing. Once again, the linear print speed that we're able to achieve with this cross-sectional area is between 8 and 10 times higher for the injection process. In addition to printing more quickly, we also demonstrate that injection allows us to print with higher viscosity resins. Higher viscosity resins, which can potentially have superior mechanical properties compared with brittle UV photopolymers. We show this here with 3 different print strategies. As a control, no injection, that is the traditional clip process in the top, injection through a single duct below, and then injection through first one, but then bifurcating ducts. A single duct splitting in the middle of the part, thanks to software engineered CAD design, into 4 regions to supply the dead zone. As printed results are shown in vertical and horizontal cross-section to the right. And in simulation, we predict that such injection should allow us to alleviate the otherwise significant pressure gradients which such high viscosity resins exert in the dead zone. For the traditional process, such high pressure gradients ultimately cause print failures, which are shown to the far right. In this case, the part as printed is outlined in green. So-called cavitation or degassing events, that is voids caused by bubbles which emerge due to such massive pressure gradients, are shown in gray. For 55 centipoise, the part is completely printed. However, for higher viscosity resins, these print defects quickly emerge. With injection through a single duct, we're able to push the maximum resin viscosity higher. However, degassing cavitation recurs for the highest viscosity resin. This is because one duct is insufficient to supply the entire dead zone with resin during printing. When we software engineer 4 ducts into our part, though, to distribute resin evenly throughout the entire part footprint, we're able to complete the print. Ultimately, we care about this because it allows us to print with, for instance, carbon nanotube filled resins, which are higher in viscosity than unfilled systems. We confirmed through uniaxial compression testing that when printing with such CNT filled resins, we achieve lattice structures that are stiffer than unfilled systems, albeit more brittle. While such studies we've discussed so far were performed with a single material, that is injecting the same material into the vat as is in the vat initially, the final advantage presented by injection clip is the capability of multi-material printing. We show here in situ images of an injection clip multi-material process, whereby we're injecting a red resin into a vat filled by initially pink resin. A well-documented phenomenon of viscous fingering, whereby a resin of a lower viscosity displacing a resin of a higher viscosity in a thin gap results in unstable flow boundaries, is observed in the in situ images in the bottom, whereby an initially stable flow boundary with the red resin and pink resin quickly becomes unstable as the red resin displaces pink resin in the dead zone during the course of the roughly 2.5-hour print. We performed calibration studies for this new multi-material process, as shown here in schematic form. The parameterization is threefold. The injection rate we can tune, that is the volumetric flux at which we're introducing injected resin to the dead zone, the speed at which we're printing, and the radius of the object printed, ultimately to get control over the fraction of the object that is occupied by injected resin versus resin that is in the vat. We simulate in CFD and computational fluid dynamics how varying injection rates should affect the composition of the dead zone, and observe in situ red resin displacing the initially clear vat-filled resin. We can quantify such results as shown to the right, whereby for higher injection rates, the fraction of the dead zone filled by injected resin increases more rapidly to 1 over the course of the print. We can vary one, but also multiple print parameters at the same time. For instance, for a part radius that is low and an injection rate that is high, we observe the highest fraction of the part filled by injected resin, as we expect. Conversely, for a high print speed, drawing in more resin from the periphery from suction, and a low injection rate, we observe the lowest fraction of the part filled by injected resin. Ultimately, these calibration studies allow us to print complex geometries only achievable by additive manufacturing. We demonstrate this with several examples here, specifically architectural models, 5 architectural models from 5 different countries, onto which, during printing, we desired to imprint the national flags corresponding to their countries of origin for Russia, England, France, America, and Ukraine. We achieve this with different print scripts for each of the buildings that software engineer different number of ducts in different positions within the part and transport a varying number of resins, 2, 3, or 4 resins, into the dead zone during printing. We experimentally validate such multi-material ICLIP print strategies as shown here for each of the 5 examples, correlating computational fluid dynamics simulations to in situ images of the print process, which demonstrate the flow boundaries that are achieved by injection at different points in the print. Image processing confirms the dynamic flow boundaries that are emerging as a result of injection, and the results of the printed parts shown to right and bottom. Because our multi-material approach is, unlike others, software-driven with minimal hardware changes to the apparatus, we have significant leeway in the design of where we distribute resin throughout the print process. Such distribution channels can be internal to the part, external to the part, or a combination thereof, as shown to the right. For the example of the Russian basilica, a single channel transports 3 different resins during printing, displacing each sequentially, first white, then blue, then red. For the case of the Arc de Triomphe, in this case, we achieve a horizontal gradient by engineering 2 ducts horizontally on either side of the growing object to achieve the blue-red color gradient. In the case of Westminster Abbey, a duct initially external to the part, that is minimizing the impact on the object itself, merges with the object, ultimately to allow the transportation of white resin into the dead zone, with UV projections, that is in situ images of the UV light shine during printing shown below. Thanks for learning about our new 3D printing method, injection continuous liquid interface production. We'd like to acknowledge all the experimental facilities at Stanford which enabled this work, our funding sources, and our competing interests.